Or 3 more women are joining an ongoing lawsuit against the Maine Correctional Center in Windham over policies regarding transgender inmates. News Center Maine's Drew Peters shows us what policies are under scrutiny.
Andrew Balser was stroking her hair and saying, if you don't wake up, it's because I smothered you with a pillow.
That's one of several allegations made by Maine Correction Center inmate Michaela Sargent.
Said some rude things and then grabbed her shirt and said, show me your boobs.
Lawyer Cynthia Dill says Sargent is one of 3 women inmates joining a lawsuit she's filed against transgender inmate and convicted murderer Andrea Balser, formerly known as Andrew.
His self-declared subjective gender identity gives him a pass into the Women's Center, and that's bad.
The lawsuit also names Maine DOC Commissioner Randall Liberty and Warden Ben Beal as defendants, alleging the department's gender-affirming policy protecting transgender inmates' housing rights is unconstitutional and that correction staff are punishing the women making complaints.
They can't go outside, there's no windows, they're in a small space, they don't take any classes, they can't go to the store, they can't go to church.
The Maine Department of Corrections says they don't comment on pending litigation, but did state that staff take all allegations of safety issues very seriously and continue to follow federal and state law in transgender housing decisions. Writing in a statement, Maine law states that every resident of a Maine correctional facility has the right to have the person's consistently held gender identity respected and acknowledged, irrespective of anatomy or physique.
And
Dill and Republican state representatives like Katrina Smith say the DOC should be doing more to protect women inmates, though.
They need to take it seriously, and I'd like to see them take the men and put them in a separate, at least a separate cell from these women.
Steps that groups like Equality Maine argue would put trans inmates' rights throughout Maine in jeopardy. Writing in part, incarcerated transgender community members have the right to have their gender identity recognized and respected, and in this spirit, the right to be housed in a facility which aligns with their gender identity. But Dill claims some trans inmates pose too much of a danger to be housed with the rest of the inmates.
We can get to a new place that fairly balances the rights of all people.
In Windham, Drew Peters, News Center, Maine.
The lawyers representing Andrea Balser and the Department of Corrections officials named in the complaint have 60 days to respond with an answer or file a motion to dismiss the complaint. Right now, the future of a referendum ballot question remains uncertain here in Maine. Last week, the Secretary of State, Shannon Bellows, determined that a petition to get the question on the ballot did not have enough valid signatures. The ballot question asks if student athletes should be required to play sports based on the sex they were assigned at birth. In our weekly segment with the Maine Monitor, reporter Matt Yunker talked to us about why voters could still see the question on their ballot in November.
So what you're going to see, I think, first is that this issue is going to go back to the Maine Superior Court, and you'll see the courts weigh some of the same issues, maybe in a slightly different way than the Secretary of State has. And so there's potential. We're talking about the margin of invalidation here right now is about 500 signatures of around 70,000. And there's been several thousand that have been disqualified. So depending on the legal arguments, depending on what judges rule, there's always possibility that maybe things go back in the other direction. So I think it's too soon to know if the court is going to uphold the Secretary of State's decision to invalidate this question, or the courts may decide that some of those signatures should actually be counted. And if the referendum supporters just pick up around 500 more back in the other direction, then we would see this on the ballot in November.
This ballot question put a spotlight on Maine's referendum process at the national level. Reporting from the Maine Monitor suggests 40% of people collecting signatures for the ballot question came from out of state. You can read more on this report at themainemonitor.org. Robbins Lumber Mill in Searsmont is back open after last month's deadly fire and explosion. Owners say the mill started fully operating and processing orders last Tuesday. They say they're using a temporary warehouse on site as well as one of their locations in Sanford. A mill in East Baldwin is being used for production needs. Owners also say that Jim, Alden, and Lily Robbins are still receiving care at Mass General Brigham's Burn Center in Boston. One firefighter, Andrew Cross from Morrill, died in the response. About a dozen other people were hurt. Investigators ruled the fire and the explosion accidental.